Hello and welcome to the latest webinar in our autumn series. Today we're going to be talking about recent developments in the world of diversity and discrimination. I'm Anna West and I'm one of the Knowledge Counsel in the employment team.
And I'm Harry Wade and I'm one of the associates in the employment team. So there's been quite a bit happening this year on the diversity front, and we'll have a look at the key developments and what they mean for you in practice as employers. One area we've seen quite a lot of focus around is around women's health, isn't it?
That's right, yes. So the focus has been mainly on the menopause, but also on other female health issues more widely. So earlier this year, there was a case called Rooney and Leicestershire City Council, in which an employee claimed that she was disabled because she had severe menopausal symptoms. She claimed her employer had discriminated against her by giving her a warning for sickness absence and asking her to explain her symptoms in front of male managers and colleagues. Now, at first, the Employment Tribunal decided the menopause wasn't a disability, but the claimant appealed, and the Employment Appeal Tribunal said the tribunal had actually asked the wrong questions about the impact of her symptoms. Now, that case was sent back to a different employment tribunal, so we don't have the final answer on it. But clearly, severe menopause symptoms could be a disability.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, could you see the law changing so this is specifically covered in equality legislation rather than being decided by the employment tribunal on a case-by-case basis? I mean, it seems to be a lot of uncertainty for employers at the moment.
I think that's right. It is quite uncertain for employers, and there have been calls for the law to be changed, but I think it's going to be unlikely. So earlier this year, the government's Women and Equalities Committee published a report on workplace practices around the menopause. And that report recommended that menopause should be a separate protected characteristic under equalities legislation, and that the government should appoint a menopause ambassador to champion good practice and produce model policies. Now, the government's indicated it doesn't plan to amend any legislation at this stage, but a women's health ambassador has been appointed, and there's going to be an employer-led government-backed communications campaign, so we'll see further guidance in this area. And ACAS has published some helpful guidance with some good practical advice on supporting employees and training managers.
What sort of steps are we seeing employers take in this area at the moment?
Well, we're certainly being asked increasingly about this issue, and we've drafted and reviewed menopause policies for employers. Sometimes managers are offered training in the policy as well. But this is part of a wider focus that we're seeing on women's health more generally. So this year, the government published a women's health strategy for England, which includes objectives for supporting women's health in the workplace on issues such as period problems, fertility treatment and menopause, and raising awareness among staff more generally. So although we're not going to see probably not going to see any legislation in respect to women's issues anytime soon, we can expect more guidance, and certainly for this to remain very much in the spotlight.
Yes, definitely. So at the moment, what would your advice be to employers in this area?
So I think if you haven't already got a menopause policy or any female health policies, you might want to consider whether that's something you want to introduce. Not something that's time critical. You might want to wait for more guidance to come out. But I think it's worth adding women's health issue to the list of what you look at next time you decide to review your suite of policies.
Absolutely. So another thing that we've seen quite a few cases on in 2022 is discrimination on the grounds of religion or belief, specifically around philosophical belief and what beliefs are considered by the employment tribunal must be protected. And there seems to be more and more examples of what kind of philosophical beliefs can be protected under discrimination law. Including environmental belief and beliefs in ethical veganism. And this line of cases, it doesn't show any sign of slowing, does it?
No, that's right. I think we're going to keep seeing different kind of beliefs potentially covered by the religion and belief discrimination law. So one strand of case law this year has centred on gender critical beliefs and whether those are protected under equality laws. So there were 3 cases on this: For Starter and CGG Europe, Macareth and DWP, and Higgs and Farmers School. And in all 3 of those cases, the claimant held gender critical beliefs, which meant that in summary they believed it's not possible to change biological sex. And the question was whether this belief was capable of protection. And in each case, the decision was that it was. So in particular, in the For Starter case, there was a debate around the fact that this belief could be offensive to others, including transgender individuals, but it was concluded that that didn't prevent the belief from being protected in law. So I think what's clear from these cases is that gender critical beliefs will be protected under equality laws. The question is how they are manifested and whether the employer's response to this is justified.
So what happened in those 3 cases that you mentioned?
Well, in the Macareth case, the claimant was a doctor, and he refused to address transgender patients by their chosen name, and the employer was justified in terminating for that reason. So the way that he manifested his beliefs was against their policies for how they treated patients and against their public sector equality duty. Now, there is an appeal in that case, so that could potentially change. The Forstater and Higgs cases both involved claimants making comments on social media, but the outcomes were different in that Ms. Forstater won her claim and Ms. Higgs failed, although again her case is being appealed.
That's interesting. So why do you think those three outcomes were different?
I think what it comes down to is the way the employee manifests their belief. So in Forstater, the tribunal analysed the social media comments and decided they weren't objectively offensive or unreasonable, whereas in Higgs, the employee had used quite inflammatory language in her Facebook posts. And I think it was also relevant that she was a pastoral administrator at a school and she would oversee students on occasion. And the school was concerned that her views could negatively impact on a wide range of people, including pupils and parents.
Yeah, I see. So what should employers do from a practical perspective?
I think what's key here is making sure that policies are up to date and making clear that employees should always be respectful of everyone else at all times, including online and on social media. And of course, highlighting that what they do outside work can be relevant at work. So that should be consistent across all your policies, including diversity policy and any policies that you have on internet use and social media. But on this theme, Harry, you had an example of an interesting case involving ethical veganism that you've been looking at, didn't you?
Yes, that's right. It's a case I read about recently called the 3 Miles case. Now, the claimant in this case was arguing that their belief in ethical veganism should be recognised as extending to taking positive action to prevent the suffering of animals by any means. Now, the way that this employee was alleged to have practiced this was to trespass on farms, remove animals as part of an animal rights group that she was suspected of being a part of. Now, for these reasons, among other reasons, the employee was dismissed, and the employee brought a claim against her dismissal. The basis of her argument was that she shouldn't be dismissed as part of being part of this animal rights group or for having done the actions that she was alleged to have done. And the way that she argued this was that she said that her dismissal was by reason of her belief in ethical veganism, and she argued that this was a protected philosophical belief.
So I thought ethical veganism had been found to be a protected belief in a previous case, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's a case called Costa v League Against Cruel Sports. And in this case, the tribunal found that the claimant, who was somebody who had basically moderated every part of their life in accordance with a quite devoted and passionate belief in ethical veganism, that his dismissal was by reason of his belief in ethical veganism, and that this was considered to be a protected philosophical belief. However, the difference in the 3 Miles case was that the tribunal found that the claimant's actions, which involved trespassing on private property and committing other illegal actions, arose from a belief that all animal suffering should be prevented. Now, the tribunal found that this could be a protected philosophical belief had those actions been done in a lawful way and was limited to lawful action. However, they found that it did not extend to any illegal activity, and as a result, her claim failed. And so the tribunal in this case was effectively saying that any belief which advocates illegal action should not be, which could not be considered worthy of respect in a democratic society, should not be protected in law. Now, there's been quite a bit of debate around political beliefs and whether they are covered. And we saw a case on this as well recently, didn't we?
Yes, that's right. With things being so volatile in British politics recently, you can see the potential for some heated discussions in this area. Now, when the religion and belief discrimination laws first came in, it was made clear in guidance that the law was not intended to cover support for a political party. So it could cover a philosophical belief which might underlie your political beliefs, like a belief in socialism, for example. Now, an interesting point on this came up in a case called Jones v Scottish Federation, where the employee worked for a housing association which had a clear policy against employees being politically active. Ms Jones was dismissed when she stood as a candidate in the 2019 general election, and the tribunal decided that she had a philosophical belief in electoral democracy, which was protected in law. Now, that was an unusual set of facts, but I think it just demonstrates we're seeing more and more types of beliefs being protected as philosophical beliefs. But just by way of contrast, there was a case involving a belief which applies to a lot of people in this country and which for many is akin to religion, which wasn't protected recently, isn't it?
True. That belief is football, as you said, a sport which a lot of people feel very passionate about. But in this case, it was found that supporting a football club was not found to be protected philosophical belief. So the employee in this case, he was very devoted to his favourite football club, Rangers FC. Not only was he a member of the club, but he had supported them for 42 years, and he actually received yearly birthday cards from them. Arguably, he says he never missed a match. And you could say that McClung, who was the employee in this case, he believed and argued that football was a way of life. And that's not unlike the claimant in the ethical veganism case that I was talking about earlier, who also felt very strongly about ethical veganism. However, the tribunal in this case found that believing in football was not a protected philosophical belief. And one reason that they provided for this was they said that football was more akin to a lifestyle choice. Now, comparing this with the ethical veganism case, it may appear confusing in first instance because there are quite a few people who would view veganism as a lifestyle choice. However, the tribunal in this case went on to say that supporting a football club, it wasn't a belief that was weighty or a substantial aspect of human life. And believing in football, it doesn't have any large consequences for humanity as a whole. One could draw a distinction between this and the ethical veganism case. Both they are lifestyle choices. People decide to believe in a football club and to follow a football club. Some people decide to go vegan. However, with going vegan, you could make an argument that people go vegan in order to take positive steps to improve the planet from an environmental perspective. And also, it's enormously important to the welfare of animals and is good for humanity as a whole, a lot of people would say.
Mm-hmm. So I think what we can take from these cases is that obviously it's going to be quite fact-specific in terms of what kind of beliefs are protected, but more and more of them are. So I think the key point for employers is how employees manifest those beliefs and whether the employers are responding appropriately to that. So we're going to look at harassment next. Harry, you were looking at an interesting case on harassment which had a fair bit of media coverage this year.
Yeah, that's right. This case was reported on in May of this year, involved an employee who was harassed in the workplace on the grounds of his sex. Now, more specifically, the harassment he was complaining of was relating to comments and threats, which at least referred to the fact that this employee was bald. Now, when this was first reported, a lot of publications said that the tribunal ruled that this was sexual harassment. And that caused a lot of confusion because a lot of people may interpret the ruling in this case as saying that, this was an instance of this employee being subjected to unwanted sexual advances, which wasn't the case. In fact, there's an important distinction between sexual harassment and sex-related harassment. And sex-related harassment is when somebody is subjected to demeaning, degrading, or insulting treatment on the grounds of their gender. And it wasn't necessary for the tribunal to find in this instance that other employees were belittling him because he was a man. All they had to find in this case was that the insults that he was receiving referred to the fact that he was bald in a negative sense. And I think this demonstrates that what could consider to be harassment is actually quite wide. But speaking of sexual harassment, though, there's some changes on the way in relation to this area, aren't there?
Yes, some changes which you could say are a long time coming, because back in 2019, the government consulted on some proposals to prevent sexual harassment at work. And they've since confirmed they will introduce a specific duty on employers to take reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment at work. Now, the difference with the position that we have now is this will be a proactive duty. So employers will have to show they've taken active steps to prevent harassment. So obviously key to that will be policies and regular training. The government's also confirmed they're going to bring in specific provisions covering third-party harassment. Now, again, it's not clear what that's going to look like, but it's suggested it will be around taking reasonable steps to prevent harassment from third parties, and there's going to be further consultation on those proposals in due course. Obviously, we'll keep you posted on that.
Absolutely. Now, do employers need to do anything at this stage?
Well, obviously when these laws are introduced, you'll need to have a look at existing policies and procedures and training programmes to make sure that those new rules are satisfied. But I would say at the moment, if you haven't looked at your policies in a while, it might be worth just looking to see if they need a refresh in any event.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. Coming on to family-friendly policies, there's been quite a few changes on this front, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. So the government's confirmed that it's going to introduce some changes which again have been trailed for a little while now. So one of them is about redundancy and maternity leave. So as you know, women who are made redundant during maternity leave are entitled to be given any suitable alternative role that their employer has. That right's going to be extended, so it will apply all the way through the pregnancy and for 6 months after coming back to work. And there are going to be 2 new types of leave introduced as well. So there'll be a new right to carers leave. That's for employees who care for dependent adults, and that will consist of 1 week of unpaid leave per year to be taken flexibly. And there's going to be a new right to neonatal leave for parents of premature babies, and that will be up to 12 weeks paid at the flat statutory rate which applies to maternity and paternity pay. So we don't have a date for these changes yet, but it looks likely that it's going to be in 2023. And just to finish with, there have been a couple of interesting developments this year in relation to equal pay.
Yes, correct. There was a case earlier this year called Mackin v BNP Paribas. The tribunal in this case ordered the employer to carry out a wide-ranging equal pay audit. Now, tribunals have had the power to do this since 2014. However, it's very rare actually that we see this kind of order.
So what do you think prompted the tribunal to order an equal pay audit in this case?
Well, in this case, it seems to be that the employer had a very opaque pay system. The tribunal thought that other women were likely to have been affected as well, and in particular in relation to bonuses. I mean, it's really a reminder of the importance of making sure that you have a clear, transparent process for setting out not just bonuses, but base salary as well. And recruitment is a particular risk area. And in fact, in this case, the employee had been recruited at the same time as her male colleague, but her salary was 3/4 of the amount that he was paid, and even though they were effectively working at the same level.
Yeah, I think that really does highlight a risk area, and that's why there's been a new campaign launched this year called End Salary History. It's a campaign which is run by the Fawcett Society. It's supported by quite a few employers, and it's aimed at ending that practice of asking candidates about their current or previous salary. Because the idea is this perpetuates the gender pay gap, because if a woman's being paid less than she should, she moves into another job and then that underpayment continues. Whereas if the employer doesn't know what she's being paid when she's offered the job, they should be setting the pay at market rate. Whereas if she's being paid less than market rate, they might be tempted to offer that lower amount instead, which continues that gap.
I can see. Do you think these sorts of questions, they may be banned altogether in future?
Well, I think that's an interesting one, because in the US, questions about salary history are banned. And in Europe, there is a pay transparency directive going through, under which salary history questions will be banned as well. Now, at the moment, there's no suggestion of an actual ban happening here, but I think it's likely that more and more employers will just adopt this as a matter of good practice in any event. And you can also see a situation where an employee who brings an equal pay claim points out in her tribunal case that she was asked about salary at interview, and that could make it more difficult for the employer to defend that claim.
Well, that brings us to the end of this diversity update. Do look out for the next webinar in the series.
And if you have any questions about anything we've covered or any ideas for future webinar topics, our details are in the notes to this webinar, and we'd be really pleased to hear from you. So thank you for watching, and see you again soon.